I am Tim Shirley, the senior minister of the SouthShore United Church of Christ. This is a sermon for August 23rd. Didn't know Joseph, didn't know Jack. The writer of Exodus begins today's lection from the Hebrew Bible by declaring, "Now a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph." Spoiler alert. Therein is the issue, the topic of holy conversation today. The problem with the Pharaoh is that he had forgotten his history, if he ever bothered to learn or even care. And it came back to haunt, to bite the Hebrews on their collective backsides. Satchel Paige once said, "Somebody always got to scape the goat." Well, somebody always got to pay for the sins of human ignorance, their own or somebody else's. But I believe there is more behind this story than what meets our eyes. The first question that comes to my mind as we consider today's lesson from the Hebrew Bible in Exodus is a proposal I had never considered until my friend Jill pointed it out as we were discussing this text. Surely the writer was writing satire, creating a not so flattering portrait, a caricature of the Pharaoh at the opening of this lection chosen for today. Surely this Pharaoh knew full well all about Joseph and his exploits, jealous in every way. How Joseph single-handedly saved the Egyptians and his own immediate family from peril during the 7 long years' famine in the land. How could he have not known? This is basic, public stuff. Unless perchance as a child he ignored the recent story of his people under the rule of his father and grandfather. This new Pharaoh should have been well informed. No excuses. Surely he had leaders and advisors who informed him of all kinds of pertinent intel. No stone left unturned. It is impossible to lead without knowledge, devoid of key information, for they are both powerful and power. Ignorance really is never bliss in the short or the long term. And besides, would have been unacceptable under any circumstances. No good reason exempting someone with such immense authority, yes, with such unlimited power, with such access to every detail in the realm. Now that I've had time to consider or to reconsider, to ponder this text with new eyes, a fresh lens, I am convinced that the writer was spoofing, that this was slapstick, tongue-in-cheek humor, and any ancient reader would have picked up on that nuance right away, far quicker than any of us making our current contemporary assumptions based on the way we have traditionally been taught to read the Bible. After all, the Bible is serious stuff. Weal or woe, heaven or hell, saved or damned kind of stuff. Not to be taken lightly. My hunch is there is much humor in the Bible that, like our own, is contextual. And so we completely miss it every time. This was a joke. A cruel joke, no doubt. The worst irony. The writer is making fun at the expense of the Pharaoh, deadpanning that he is a dolt, an idiot, a buffoon, moron, fool of the highest order. The magnitude of his carnival barking stupidity aired for all the world to see. With this interpretive approach, we can read the narrative in a whole new way while still learning from our original, shall we say, literal verbatim appropriation. Yes, learning lessons from our history, painful and otherwise, is paramount to our learning and evolving into the best humanity we can be and ever become. What I see at stake in this text is the authenticity of self, of being self-aware and knowing who you are, as well as being able to discern with much wisdom the realities circling and sometimes seeking to ensnare. What I further see in this text is a tale of two kinds of liars, a good one and a bad one, a helpful one and a destructive one, a caring and compassionate one and a vile and ruthless, wickedly oppressive one. Let's get after it. The story is a reminder that life is rarely simple and straightforward, rarely cut and dried, that there is much nuance, that nothing is ever as uncomplicated or lacking complexity as it often appears on a first glance. There is a lot of gray area to living. There are always dynamics, as Israel Galindo would say, hidden dynamics, all determining best practice. What I love the most about Shiphrah and Puah, the two Hebrew midwives, and by the way, their story is so much more about them than the narcissistic Pharaoh. It is their uncanny intuitive ability, their sensitivity to their surroundings and the situation and circumstances in which they found themselves. For all intents and purposes, their reality should have dictated to them straightforward, lockstep obedience. But they refused to allow their predicament to define them or drive their actions. They showed independence and resilience within a cultural milieu that without fail predetermined their role, their lot in life as women, dictating their behaviors and their responses no matter the stimuli, a clear and determinate guideline programming their behavior, their every move. Women were supposed to be seen and not heard. Either valuable virgins traded on the open market like any common commodity, or barefoot and pregnant, fertile vessels, functioning as lemmings, robots in every way as they obeyed their husbands and any other man who might choose to give them orders. These women, these fiercely independent and resourceful women, had the audacity, the temerity to dare stand in the face of the Pharaoh of all people and lie like a rug. In their lying, their blatant dishonesty, they ironically spoke truth to power, letting Pharaoh go, as my friend Nancy Hastings Sehested once declared about their resolve in a sermon. Not only did they choose a baseline of doing no harm, but they chose to do the life-giving thing, the good, better, and best thing the greatest thing imaginable. Talk about coloring outside the lines, thinking outside the box. These women gave subterfuge a whole new meaning. They were subversive in every way and blessed for it. Perhaps this story is a reminder that women in the ancient world had to have a high level of guile and dexterity, a certain amount of cunning and conniving, and even deceit, in order to survive in a male-dominated patriarchal society. Survival of the fittest, and these women were indeed fit. Shiphrah and Puah are not the only deaf women we find throughout the biblical narrative. Perhaps a subtle hint, or more than subtle, that women had to be quick on their feet back in the day, shifting on the fly in order to negotiate their very limited landscape. Years ago, I was introduced to a most informative, intriguingly interesting, provocative book by ethicist Joseph Fletcher called Situation Ethics. A brilliantly crafted work reminding us that life is often lived in the gray areas, within the uncertainty, engaging, navigating, and negotiating the question marks of life, where we often find ourselves. The premise is that throughout our lives, circumstances and situations often present themselves that demand not only our attentiveness, our thoughtfulness, but require us to look beyond the usual or the obvious, to take in all sides, the big picture, and all its consequences and ramifications. Every perspective and spectrum of life's kaleidoscope. Sometimes going against convention is the discretion that is indeed the better part of valor. Look once again at today's primary election for this sermon. What if Shiphrah and Puah had benignly, passively, obediently just gone through the proverbial motions, meeting minimal expectations, following every rule? What if they were so robotical in their being that the only solution they could see in their dilemma was to go with the flow and obey the king's command, follow his evil, wicked orders like a good soldier? Remember the touching movie Schindler's List, where the hero in this true story did everything within his limited power, all that he could do to save Jewish lives, while at the same time sabotaging weapons of war, thwarting every effort and order to aid the Nazi German cause. History has been kind to Schindler because of his great legacy. He has been lauded and applauded for his heroic efforts. Yes, we are taught that lying is never a good thing, always wrong. Perhaps except when it is not. Shiphrah and Puah beg to differ, reminding us that doing the common good is always preferred, a more than reasonable expectation. What is really demanded of us, that we practice kindness, do justice, and walk humbly with our God is the only acceptable alternative, the only suitable way to go, no matter subversive or tempting inclinations or whatever convention indicates or suggests or implores us to do. Shiphrah and Puah knew who they were and whose they were. They would not be deterred from their righteous point of view. Yes, we walk by faith and not by sight. And sometimes that insecure place is the best security we have at our disposal. This is one of the major reasons that fundamentalism simply does not work. Breaking down at the point of our desire and our ability to interpret our world and make better, efficacious decisions accordingly. Narrow and inflexible approaches to all life's nuances rarely has a chance to succeed. No good place to go at all because it puts us in a corner, boxes us into the possibilities that are really impossibilities. Nothing more than a mirage. No positive outcome ever possible. It is fool's gold. The only potential resolution, a poignant and painful result. Shifra and Puah remind us to have open hearts and minds, to listen for the still speaking Spirit, to always be adaptable as we manage the multifaceted layers of our lives. As I suggested earlier, surely a major part of their humble success in service to God and neighbor was their own self-awareness, the fact that they knew who they were. Their clarity of self, their internal moxie, gave them clarity to discern their way through the thicket of the complex conundrum they faced. They knew who they were being in that given moment. What proved to be a bellwether moment in time of the highest mountain and magnitude. These events clearly of biblical proportions. A huge hurdle to leap. The adage is so ever true. Don't try and be someone else. They are already taken. Discover your authentic self, that which defines you, motivates you, and life will slow down enough for you to see your way through even the toughest times, even times like these seemingly endless 2020 COVID-19 coronavirus times. Times that are stressful in so many ways, like none other we have ever experienced. Football is coming, so it's time for a football analogy. In professional football, insiders, especially coaches, talk about the game slowing down for the players, particularly the quarterbacks who must read complex and well-disguised defenses, zone blitzes and the like, nickel and dime coverages, things they never saw at this level in college. Slowly, sometimes suddenly, dramatically, the players come to a point where they are able to visualize plays and player schemes as if in slow motion. Once that is achieved, they can now play the game to its highest level. Shifra and Puah were able to slow down their world to where they could compartmentalize, see everything independently and in pieces and as a whole. And were able to adjust and to respond far removed from a reaction that would have imperiled them and the precious little ones in their care. The Apostle Paul gives his reader some most reasonable advice. In essence, he reminds his Roman audience to be who they are, echoing a theme we see throughout today's lections. He says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Instead, be reasonable, since God has measured out a portion of faith to each one of you. We have many parts in one body, but the parts don't all have the same function. In the same way, though there are many of us, we are one body in Christ. And individually, we belong to each other. We have different gifts that are consistent with God's grace that has been given to us. If your gift is prophecy, you should prophesy in proportion to your faith. If your gift is service, devote yourself to service. If your gift is teaching, devote yourself to teaching. If your gift is encouragement, devote yourself to encouraging. The one giving should do it with no strings attached. The leader should lead with passion. The one showing mercy should be cheerful. In other words, what Paul is saying, is trying desperately to convey, is to be who you are. To be who you have been called and equipped to be. Only you know for sure. Though others might sometimes see something in you even before you do. That is the gift of community. And you can only be who you are when you are who you are. Everyone has a gift. A God-given gift, a blessing with which to bless. It is a reminder that none of us are alone. We are all in this together. This beloved faith community. It takes all of us to be one body. We can and must learn to lean on and learn from one another. To trust in one another. Be responsible and accountable to one another in order to build the body of Christ as a local missional church and globally to build a better world where the realm of God is at least somewhat visible. In the name of the one who creates, redeems, and sustains, and gives us the wit and wisdom through the still speaking Spirit to discern the spirits, to make wise choices when the answers are not always obvious and readily available. Amen and amen.